Okay, there we go.
All right.
It looks like we are on. So welcome everybody to another episode of the Life Maximizer Academy. I'm back with last week's guests. I have Jim, Cheryl, Wendy, and Kate with us again. And after last week's conversation around trap trauma and business and how that shows up in other aspects of our lives, we've been in a conversation over the past couple of days around um, the spiritual divide or closing the spiritual divide within ourselves, within our businesses, within our leadership, and within communities. And so today, that is going to be our conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's insights. So, Kate, before we dive into to Jim's little segment, is there anything that you want to share?
I think just in setting context, so for those of you that are watching, a lot of us work with leaders. Well, actually all of us work with leaders, but you may be leading a business, you may be leading a team. And we're at a moment in time where we are very aware of our weakness in this moment, those edges where we don't necessarily have the bandwidth. And so like, this is the most important conversation as a starting point, like on the ground floor of where all that resilience comes from. And how and who you think you need to be in this moment as you're doing that. This conversation is going to anchor you in a profound way because it's at the source where everything about you begins. And so so come in with that listening, regardless of if we're using language that is unfamiliar to you. Just come in and explore with us for a moment and think about leading your life, your family, your business, your team, your vision, your dream. And we can all find a seat at that table because this is what unites us. But there's some links in it I think you'll find unique by the expression here today by the five of us. So that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I love your way of languaging the container for us because it really helps us focus. So, Jim, with that, I want to hand it over to you because you've been sharing a lot of really interesting insights of how you see this play out in leadership and in business.
Okay, great. So just the starting point that I've just noticed that there are so many people who are coaches, consultants, experts in what they do, and they've developed this level of mastery that now they're ready to turn into contribution. And one of the ways that happens is that they get in touch with some, like it's a big mission, it's a calling, it's like, hey, this is the thing that I'm supposed to do, the contribution I'm here to make to the world. And they get really excited about that. And then what I've noticed is that they put that on a pedestal. And so it's this thing of like, oh, this is the thing that's going to make all my wildest dreams come true, or, whatever, and make all of this change in the world. And then what I've seen so many times is that the very act of putting that on a pedestal is what ends up sabotaging it. And so then I started thinking about, okay, well, what might be a more effective way of looking at that? And so then what I developed was this little pyramid. You don't have to try to read it all at once. I'll tell you what's going on here. But first, so it's that reverence, that honoring, that the calling or mission is at the top of the pyramid. But for a pyramid to have any strength, it obviously has to have some layers and some base below it. And so we can be like in reverence, in honor of this calling, but without having an audience that supports that calling, then we're going to have some challenges. So that's the next level below having reverence for the mission. We also get to have reverence for whoever it is, however they're partnering with us in creating that mission, whether if it's a business, that those are clients and customers that are part of that audience, could be even part of a team, whatever, but there's got to be that reverence for our collaborators in creating that mission. And then the big place where it seems to be a challenge for so many people, is having reverence for ourselves. So that's the base of the pyramid, of being able to find, to me, it's kind of this combination of being able to honor the best of yourself without taking it to some bizarre egoic place. And to me, this is a shift into your genius. And so the way I view it, and the way that, to me, genius feels very spiritual to me, is that Jeffrey Van Dyke and I, when we used to talk about this quite a bit, we came up with a definition of genius. And our definition is God or the divine expressed through you, as you, in service to a mission greater than you. And so it's kind of like it's capturing this pyramid here. And so to have reverence for ourselves requires a particular shift, from my perspective, from out of our zone of competence, the things that we can do, into genius. Like, okay, stop doing the things that you can do and express God through you, as you, in service to a greater mission, a mission greater than you. So that's that first shift. And then when we do that and have that honor, that reverence for ourselves, then we're capable of having reverence for that second layer of whoever that audience is. And the big shift here that we make is from some superiority, inferiority dynamic of like, they have the money, so I'm inferior, how do I get them to pay? Or I have the knowledge, I'm going to get them to understand this thing, so whatever. So shift out of that dynamic into advocacy, where we are the advocates for what they want. Because if we've developed expertise, we're in the best possible position to advocate for them on their behalf and be able to support them. And then the top level. So instead of putting that mission on a pedestal and something that often turns into this thing that we're obligated to do, and like, oh, but this is my calling, this is what God wants me to do. I gotta do it. To shift to a partnership where we partner with the mission, partner with the calling, because the mission, the calling doesn't exist without you. And so you're a key component. You're not a slave to it. You're not to show up to do that. It's a partnership. And so this is kind of how I view this, how business can be a spiritual practice in coaching, consulting, that sort of thing, making these three shifts from competency to genius, from superiority to advocacy, and then from obligation to partnership as we move up this pyramid. So that felt like a lot there, and I don't know.
Don't worry, we're
love
going
to
to
hear some
unpack it.
comments or thoughts or whatever.
We're definitely going to unpack it. One of the questions that came to mind is, I would love to get everybody else's definition of reverence. We heard it from Jim's in terms of the business context or marketing context, but what does it mean in your, what does reverence mean for you in your world, and how you think about it?
For me, reverence and sacredness are almost interchangeable. I really think about one of the pieces of the divide that I identify is this disconnect from self, kind of with a capital S, this inner knowing, this intuitive information that isn't about the five senses. It's really about this sort of visceral knowing that we have, that we haven't really learned how to cultivate. And so part of what I'm seeing in the people that I'm working with is they're not necessarily turning the mirror back and seeing themselves sacred. And then when you don't see yourself as sacred, it's really hard to look out into the world and see other people as sacred. So that reverence, it's sort of like a mindset shift to really start to, a lot of the conversations I have with people and want to cultivate are about oneness and unity. And there's this internal knowing within yourself that you're part of the bigger whole. And then helping other people see that. So that's how I think about what Jim's talking about.
Yeah, Kate or Cheryl, what about you?
I'm like lost on my mute button. So it's interesting, my mind always jumps, whatever you're talking about, my mind is making a connection someplace else, but I'm staying with this reverence. I'm like, grab myself back into this. There's a reverence. I was thinking like immediately how it's ingrained in a lot of us that that at our core, we need saving. And so the paradigm shift for me, which increased my faith, not the opposite, for those of you that are watching, which increased my faith, was shifting my interpretation of what that meant at my core space. And so that means my inherent worth doesn't need saving. And just sitting with that was like the thread that moved everything else in my business. And I would say even in the last 12 months, and me as a human being in this time of like looking at all of the ways that if I don't believe at that core, I have inherent goodness, then the reverence, there's nothing to revere after that. I'm like trying to fill in this hole because I'm wicked at my core. And so it's allowed me to have a fresh experience of my own spiritual path and journey, which is Christian based. And I still love me some Jesus. And I believe that's what he was trying to say. And it's also polarizing in some communities because their entire structures, their business, everything has been set on somebody needs to be the hero and do the saving, and somebody is wicked or doing the wrong thing. And so this reverence for me is holding people as good and worthy, and beginning, in my own self, and really understanding if I'm operating from that space of goodness, what else might be possible.
And so I'll share. For me, reverence is, like I live by Ocean Beach and I get to watch the sunset every day, and it's like this brilliant sunset. And for me, the sun setting, the colors and everything, it's invaluable. And that's the kind of reverence that I have when I'm in touch with that. It's in me, this invaluable part of being human, of being a part of this ecosystem, of being part of the whole. And so, I think perhaps maybe the other end of it is placing value on things, on specific parts of me, versus looking at what's invaluable about me and you and us and an ape or a dog or a tree or a plant, and all of that is invaluable. You can't put a price tag on it. You can put a price tag on a view, maybe if you buy a building and you can, but the actual sunset itself is invaluable, just as it is in me and you and all of us. So that's my sort of sense of what reverence is.
Yeah, as you all were sharing, so many thoughts came to mind, because I'm thinking about it in the terms of like my strengths as an individual or as a human being, and thinking about my goodness and coming back to my goodness. And I think it's so easy to take on external messaging about who we are as people and not have that internalized in some form or fashion. And so we forget our reverence, or we forget our sacredness. And I think so much of the personal development work, transformation work, business work, I think of business as a spiritual practice, like Jim and you all do. But there's a sacredness to that. And when we can honor that and really acknowledge, wow, I am this sacred person. So that means these other people that I'm reaching out to or working with, they're sacred people too. And in a lot of ways, it forces you to I shouldn't say forces you, it gives you an opportunity to look for the sacredness versus to look for the difference. And so much of my practices now are about how can I find the sameness within in us, especially when we're different, and figuring out where our reverence overlaps or where our sacredness overlaps.
One of the thoughts that's occurring to me right now about reverence is indistinguishable from God. So how can that there's something within me that, okay, if I'm uncomfortable saying that is God, but if it's indistinguishable from God, maybe that's close enough. Maybe if I can see in another person that thing that is indistinguishable, if I can see in the mission that thing that's indistinguishable from God, that it is this, for me, it's much more experiential than the words that I can really put on it, but I know it when I feel it. I know it when I'm faking it, or when, like, truly no, I'm seeing and experiencing that thing.
And one of the things I'd like to point out, because Jim keeps making reference to God, like these kind of concepts that we're talking about, regardless of what sort of religious ideation you have or structures that you use, in my opinion, all these paths lead to that same source of knowing and that source of divinity. And we can come from a variety of different religious backgrounds or spiritual backgrounds and still meet in the same place. I've been using in my business an image, and it's motivated from the scripture in Islam that talks about the place where two seas meet. And this happens throughout the world, but there are places where like a blue sea and a brown sea meet and they don't touch. Yet there's like a membrane between them. And these two vastly different things can be together and honor each other and have reverence for each other, and not have to trample all over each other or compete with each other. And so I think about that image a lot. You know, we here intentionally get into difficult conversations with people. And sometimes it's nice to remember that that really thin membrane is there, you know, between our energy fields. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that piece.
Yeah, what you're making me think of is like, how do we more effectively coexist? And obviously there are people who want that to happen, and then there are people who they don't want that to happen. And so I think part of the intention of this conversation is really to pull in more of those people who do want it to happen, because as you can see, we're all very different. We come from different religious backgrounds, we have different orientations, we have different points of view about things, and yet we're finding this connection point in the conversation around sacredness and reverence, and we can respect each other's opinions about what it means or what our experiences are in relationship to that topic. And I think that's really where the value of panels like this or discussions like this can be really helpful. I'm not trying to convince you all of anything, but I do think it's really important for people to feel comfortable bringing their viewpoint to the table and just know that it can be heard and for it to be with. So Kate, where you mentioned earlier that your mind was taking you off into other places. What was surfacing for you?
Well, I'm imagining, you know, part of this of like holding ourselves reverent is obviously Donnie and I do a lot with strengths with our clients, and to some degree, all of us do. So, because there is this idea of we view each other through a lens of looking for what's working, and you can do that. It's easier to strength spot, and it's easier to do that when you believe you have like what has to happen for somebody to be able to strength spot, or to be able to start seeing the gifts and promoting the gifts in others and listening in a way, looking for that gift. And so I was just curious, because that's like an obvious outcome from And I think, Cheryl, you had some really wonderful language around like reclaiming parts of ourselves. And I was wondering if you might go there, because I think that's the solution.
Yeah, I think we live, I think across cultures, every cultural context and every kind of system has a particular way in which it values some pieces of a person versus other parts. And the parts that aren't valued get pushed down. And we often, I think shame is experienced right around the 2.5, 3 is when we started first knowing what shame is. And so these parts are oftentimes the parts of ourselves that we sort of lose touch with how invaluable these parts of us are as well. And sometimes they can feel like, hunger. I don't mean physical. So sometimes it could be physical hunger that bring these things up, but it can feel like emotional or, existential type hunger for validation. It's a little bit about what we talked about, the validation marketing and all that. And I think that when we start to lead around, we could have like a thought or an experience and we're leading from that thought, or we're breathing consciousness into a particular thought and starting to lead something. I often think about where we're leading from, like which parts of ourselves we're leading from. Are we leading from us as, the invaluable kind of whole part of ourselves? Or are there parts of ourselves we're just sort of hiding away and we're secretly underneath this trying to get that validation marketing for these pieces that are so detached from ourselves? And so I think that in the process of leading, it can feel like a tear in our spirits or in our sense of who we are, because we're reaching for something so sacred, right? Hey, this sacred thing, right, that we're going for. This is my higher purpose. And then there's also like, I'm so hungry for this validation. And it can feel like, okay, I need to feed myself and I need to serve this higher thing at the same time. And this pull, this tear oftentimes gets translated in our relationships. And on a societal level, that's where I see a lot of societal divisions, racism, oppression, all the phobias and the isms, they get sort of translated externally into these really, really horrible divisions. And so I think those are the thoughts. A little bit all over the place as well.
I love, Cheryl, that you use the word tear, because like I use a rubber band as an example of like, for people to see what their resistance looks like. It's like there's tension in my need to be comfortable, the gravity of reality, and also the dream and that purpose and that mission. And they always seem to be pulling at each other in another way. Jim, in marketing, when people are messaging their business from this place, where do you see, talk to me just like from that aspect of what do you notice happening for entrepreneurs, mission driven?
So yeah, help me understand the question just a little bit more, because I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, so the tear, or this like where the breakdown might be when we're on this mission, and at the same time feeling the gravity of to care for ourselves, because we're like stepping into the terror of the visibility on one hand, if I just use that context,
Right,
and then with a huge mission, and then also I don't want to do it. Like there's that other part of me that wants to stay safe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, my perspective is that that this is probably back to the trauma conversation, is that a way of kind of viewing trauma experiences is that it creates a fragmented identity that is part of us, that is really the coping mechanism to protect against that sort of thing happening in the future. And so it seems to me that we end up with these various identities then that have this push and pull of like, yes, this part of me that sees the vision and wants to do this, but then the part of me that sees every time I've been criticized for putting myself out there or that sort of thing, that that magnifies, like that one negative comment to outweigh the 25 positive comments that we got, or that sort of thing. And these sort of pieces that have very positive intentions, but that undermine the bigger mission because they're in protection of themselves, because they respond from us somehow being hurt by situations, circumstances that we were unable to handle at that time, usually at either a younger age or just in an unresourceful position where we just couldn't handle that situation from where we were. And so we had to develop some sort of something inside us to be able to deal with it. I don't know if I drifted on the answer or not.
As you were talking, Jim, I was thinking about this sort of when we look at what's happening interpersonally, personally, and societally, we end up in these loops of fear and then hate and then prejudice. And when I say prejudice, it's not always like prejudice towards other people, but sort of like habitual prejudgments. And so the longer we stay disconnected from source, the less able, when we're not able to connect to source, divine, God, whatever terminology you use, that loop of fear and hate and prejudice just sort of keeps going, and we tend to turn it inside of ourselves, and it becomes very self-destructive. And one story, as everyone was talking, I'm feeling inclined to share about really looking at other people as sacred, like finding myself sacred and other people as sacred. I have a medical condition that has required me to get infusions since 2014. I get them once a week. And the interesting thing about this infusion that I have is that it requires 10,000 donors of blood plasma per batch. So once a week, I'm literally being infused with the cells of 10,000 other people. And with Kate's help, I've been able to kind of make this look like a ritual. The reason I'm choosing to share this with you is because I really don't care at all about who those 10,000 people are, except that they're souls who chose to step forward and be generous with their biological material, their color, their race, their religion, their politics. None of that, absolutely none of that matters, because on a cellular level, they're able to donate and they're able to help heal me. So really at that level, at the cellular level, it's all just sacred and magical to me.
Yeah, one of the stories that I shared with Kate last night as we were exchanging was I've been trying really hard to push away my cancer coaching work. It's like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. And it magically enters its way into my my world as much as I try and resist it. And so last night, I finally decided to take a little time to think about it. And what I realized is that the cancer coaching work really gave me the opportunity to throw away the labels we put on people. Because it's like, all right, you are just this soul who is having this cancer experience. You could be black, white, gay, straight, a kid, an adult, it doesn't matter. And so it really forced me to look at like the stuff that I bring and put on people. And then when I don't put that on it, I really just get to see people at their core and their essence and see them at their goodness. And so it's really interesting hearing your story about you don't care who the donors are, because again, it's about the essence of like, here are these souls who are simply helping me be or helping me live. And we all have this connection. And I think we all have the ability to see in that way or experience people in that way. but it does require some energy and effort because it forces us to like set our stuff down for a bit. And if we have any type of pain or hurt from particular communities, then it makes it really hard to put the baggage down. And so I'm finding for myself now as I step into more of my work that I'm starting to lean into the gift of the cancer coaching experience and seeing how much can I just be with people's essence and look for their essence and leave some of the the labels off the human.
I was thinking about how, as a space holder, you know, everybody here holds a kind of space, or there's always a container when you're with people. If we can just agree on that, there's something happening when you're engaging with somebody, and the energies are flowing back and forth. And I'm obviously a very sensory person, and so sometimes I don't experience that through words, but I feel it. It's color, it's sound, and the more I'm leaning into that, the better my life is. You know, I'm holding that sacred, that piece of me that's a little different, and it's a progress journey for me. It's like to allow it and allow myself to have whatever process that I need. And I love meeting people who are in that. And I was thinking back of like, what are the roots of reverence in that, or like how I healed the divide in myself in part of that. And it's when I look back at the dignity of losing everything, like for me in my physical journey of being, I remember sitting in ICU, probably laying down, actually. I wasn't sitting, but like being in ICU, and I was looking for my parents because I had just woken up, and this was like in 2007. And I knew that I'd had a near-death experience, and that this was like 3 years of surgeries, and I was really only halfway through of what those might be. And they still weren't sure if I'd ever be a whole healthy human again. And I was taking really big risks by saying yes to some of these procedures. And that was like from a disjointed part of myself that was looking for a silver bullet. And I was taking risks, massive risks, because I wanted to close the loop of health, you know, as any woman in her early 30s would. But in that, of like having to be in ICU for so long, and the doctor had made a mistake, and that's what put me there. And I was like just in having feeling your own mortality, and like how precious, even for my own life, like starting to value my life is not something I can gamble with, even though people will gamble with it. And I thought of my kids, and I thought of like this high performance, high achieving part of me was really killing my body, even in terms of how I made medical decisions and how I interacted, because I didn't want to be needy. I didn't want to be the patient, because I used to work in a hospital in social work. And it was this really necessary flip. And I see people so often like we're resisting the suffering that's going to produce that reverence and that sacredness. Like we're resisting it in our, even with others, we're like, we don't know how to be in the mess with each other very well. And it's, so if you're resisting your own pain and your own journey, and even looking at how you cope with pain, and like the way that you do suffering may need a rewiring, and that's okay. But if I'm not willing to like fully be in all of it, I am, and hold that pain as sacred, equally sacred to me in the Southern mode, I'm unable to really leverage what's possible in some of those spaces. It impacts how I listen, how I serve, and really having a vision that I'm like, I can be all in for. It really confused my purpose until I allowed myself just to sit with that the whole way.
Yeah, one of the things that relates to for me is the fact that if anybody is in a business to help others, there's this quite often something that the person is dealing with that they need validated, honored, understood, that any time that we are either ignoring, discounting the magnitude that the challenge feels that they are dealing with, and like, oh no, that's no big deal. Hey, come do my my 3-step thing over here. And that sort of thing is the opposite of revering who that person is. It's also the opposite of revering ourselves, because we're not showing up as that human being, seeing and supporting another human being. We turn into commodity pushers and idea, like look at this thing, you have to see this thing that I have over here, where really the more that we discount, ignore, minimize what it feels like for somebody, the more that they feel they need to hold on to that. When we make it okay for them to have their problems, they're more likely to release them and actually do the work with us. So to me, that was the connection that I was seeing there as well, because nobody wants to feel like we're suffering in that everybody is blind to it, that is not really happening, and that nobody understands. Like it's got to start at that place before we're even willing to listen to how somebody can help us.
One of the conversations that I had with another colleague yesterday was around why I talk about the things I talk about. And if people have listened into my conversations, it's usually about the unpopular topics, it's about difficult topics, it's about things like grief or trapped trauma or spiritual divides or sex or sexuality. And I bring those up in conversation, in part because I think it's really important to normalize those parts of our humanity when we try so hard to keep them in the closet. It's like, all right, this is coming from the same gender-loving Black man. Take your stuff out of the closet, if for nobody else, for yourself. Like, because you will have more peace of mind and space and just, mental bandwidth to either deal with the issues or to find help to deal with the issues and to help you move forward in your work life and your love life and your personal life. Because when we're always trying to keep the door shut, and you're also trying to be with the people around you and take care of the things that are in your present day, it becomes so heavy. It becomes really, really heavy. And I think that's also part of the spiritual divide. I've had a whole lot of baggage around Catholicism and Baptist, Southern Baptist, my Southern Baptist upbringing. And now is the first time in my life where I'm starting to begin to really appreciate faith and religion and spirituality in a whole new way. I was just talking to a buddy of mine yesterday. I now understand what this little light of mine means. It's like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Like, it no longer is this little cute song that little kids sing in their school. It's like, no, we all have this light, so just let the damn thing shine. And it's so freeing and liberating. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion, because I think there's been this internal tear within all of us that sometimes we're aware of and sometimes we're not aware of, that it impacts so many aspects of our lives. And I think if we're going to move forward more effectively in 2021, then we have to begin to at least look at those or acknowledge that they're there, so that you're not suffering as much as you might be right now.
Another add-on, which could be for another conversation, but I'm looking at when I'm in that space of this reverence and the sacredness, and all things are sacred, everything is spiritual, and I connectedness is my number one talent, and so I live there, which is totally fine, but I don't stay there all the time, right? Because I'm a human being. So for all of you that are experiencing, sometimes we feel connected to it, and sometimes we do disconnect. And so doing investing in the understanding and getting support to be able to understand how and when and why I disconnect from feeling connected. and how I opt out, what creates that. And if you're watching, I just want to encourage you, any one of us up here could support you in that. So reach out and start. It's a beautiful mystery, right? Like you're just an amazing story waiting to unfold. And how and why is super sacred also. And it's unique to you. And those that get to walk and be in the dignity of that type of conversation with you, especially if you have have a history that you're reconciling, like what a wonderful gift for them to get to walk with you inside of that space as you examine it. And so holding that process sacred, and find mentors and coaches and therapists and people and communities that can support that full humanity, and reach out on Donnie's page and to the Life Maximizer if that's where you're at.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what Kate is sharing, part of the tear is, and I think coming back to Jim's model too, that sometimes what I've seen is that the tear is this, the part that is sacred is separate from the material, the work we're doing, the suffering, the divisiveness that we feel. And for me, how can I attend to this suffering? How can I attend to this division from that sacred? So it's not like I'm ignoring the fact that we have differences. I'm not ignoring the fact that oppression exists, that I have all this stuff that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day, that I don't have these challenges, with my leadership or my personal life or whatever it is. But how can I attend to these things from that place of reverence? How can I hold these divisions? How can I hold these things and do the work from that place that is divine in me, divine in you? How can I come to this place of remembrance that I, that yes, the divine is here, even in this really horrible thing. It's here. And so it's almost like this duality, that, again, duality again, coming into integration for me. So that's what's coming up for me.
Yeah, I just have never seen anything amazing built upon a foundation of self-damnation. Haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's happened somewhere, but I personally have not witnessed self-damnation as a foundation for anything beautiful. And so to me, that is just like whatever the work is that it requires to find what is amazing, unique, beautiful about ourselves. Just it's so overlooked when especially in some of the helping fields, and that it's this kind of like seeking to help enough others to help ourselves. I haven't seen that work either. And so to me, it feels like it needs to go together.
We used to have this model in personal training where it was similar. It would actually go really nicely with your pyramid of the foundational piece is all around stabilization. The middle piece is about strengthening, and then the top piece is really about power. And when I would work with my personal training clients, I would always start out with that stabilization piece, because there were so many pieces of just their foundation that they were either overcompensating or undercompensating. There wasn't this balance. And so when you started talking about not building upon self-damnation, I realized that's the muscle that we've been strengthening. We haven't been strengthening the reverence muscle. And so for a lot of people, it's really, really weak. And sometimes we don't even know we have those muscles. so like me trying to ask you to lift 60 pounds of self-reverence when you've been lifting 300 pounds of self-damnation, that's a really hard thing to do. And I think what this conversation is helping me realize, but I think we're all pointing to, is that we're inviting people to start strengthening some new muscles. And a lot of those are self-appreciation muscles, remembrance muscles, self-reverence muscles. And I think we all have tools for doing that. Kate, I know you do a lot of work with strengths. That for me is a self-reverence muscle. Wendy, the work that you do around connection and holding space, that's a self-reverence muscle. Cheryl, your modalities. Jim, your models around genius. Like, I think we're all helping people remember those muscles, but also to build upon them. And it's really exciting to think about, like, the facilitation that we're helping people with as they move into really appreciating themselves, so that they can appreciate the people that they're helping, and that they can better support the people that they're wanting to help without having to sacrifice themselves and sacrifice their mission.
In this time of duality and either or, black and white thinking, as I'm listening to everyone talk, the word complexity keeps coming to mind. It's almost like this piece where we get to look inside ourselves and honor the complexity, honor the mixed feelings, honor all of the different parts of us. And then we get there, and then sometimes, and I'm at fault for doing this too, we look at other people and we really simplify who they are. Like, oh, they're simple, they're this or that. We can label, but as we get to foster and cultivate this loving complexity of ourselves, it enables us to be able to have the capacity to do it more with others.
Jim, were you going to say something?
I was thinking, oh, do I have something to say there? And I was landing on an empty space there.
What came to mind when Wendy was talking is, I almost feel like sometimes leadership, it's like, Bruce Lee is coming to mind. He was talking about being like water, and water takes on whatever shape it's in. It expands, contracts, becomes ice, becomes liquid, it can boil, and then it becomes alchemy with, heat, and then evaporates. But I think we are that complex, and we are also not separate from other people. I think there's also this illusion of separateness from others. When I look at the globe, it's water. I mean, we keep looking at the land and all the lines that are on there and all the labels we've placed on the land, but actually we're all connected by water, and we are 70% water. And most things are essentially water, and it's so complex. Like, water takes on any flavor that you put like lemon in it, and it's like lemon water. And so I think it's really multi-layered, multi-dimensional. Who we are, our relationships, our connections, who we are as a planet. It's really, really so incredibly intricate. And but I think when we're traumatized, when we're in scarcity, we reduce things into a single story really quickly. I was just doing that last night, and my wife caught me. She's like, I think you're doing that single story thing that you keep talking about, Cheryl. I'm like, oh yeah, I just did that. I just did that reductionistic thing that I keep saying not to do. But anyway, so that's the thing that came up for me.
Cheryl, what I love so much about that example that you just shared is that you're the perfect demonstration of, like, and we're also doing this too. Like, we're having to talk and walk ourselves through the exact same things that we're talking to you all about. And some days is great, and some days it's like, oh yeah, I'm being a jerk today. I need to like clean that up. But that is, honoring that is part of the duality. We have a beautiful side and we have a shadow side. And I think when we can sit with those two things, then we can be a much more thoughtful human being. and a kinder human being. But if we don't bring it out of the closet and shed a little bit of light on it, then it makes it really hard to move in a different direction.
Just want to add to that is, in this new era of running online business, hello, all businesses are online. But in the new era of that, what people are hitting up against is, they're like, what we're resisting is that we need help, because there's no way we can learn all the systems to even make that happen. If we want to execute on these big visions, this is like the number one pain point that I see right now, is people don't know how to get themselves to learn all the things, because we're such in this independent space. So they're warring against themselves as they're trying to get this mission. If we can look at this sacredness and start looking at this interconnectedness amongst us, and start building out these, a way for us to all kind of come to that finish line and sharing those resources, that's what people want. But in order to do that, it's not just designing alliances with strengths. It's really this different type of care incubator, where you can need and not be enough and not understand. And so it's an opposite than what you're seeing marketed to you probably right now. What really is helping people get to that finish line and learn how to collaborate, and how to be somebody who can operate in that container without all of the show and my resistance and tears, within myself and others. This is the process to learn how to collaborate, and you will need it, because I hope that you're lost the whole way there and have the beauty of intimacy when you can give and contribute and receive. You can't just give. We can't just keep breathing in without breathing out. There has to be a giving and receiving. The tide goes out, the tide goes in. And the faster you make friends with that, the more your big, beautiful mission, the faster it will get into the world. It's the extent you let people in.
Well, one of the mindset shifts that you all have helped me make in this in this conversation is connected to reverence. And part of that reverence for myself means not trying to always look good, because there's so much that I just don't know. And like the perfectionist in me, and the traumatized part in me of being the only, or not wanting to make a mistake, or not wanting to lose out on opportunities, is so much around like, okay, I need to go in and have them believe that I'm competent, or that I have a certain level of expertise in this and all of these things. And one, that's not honoring of myself, but also I don't get to honor other people's reverence for their genius. It's like, oh yeah, I want to go and talk to Cheryl, because Cheryl's genius is in leadership, consciousness, and psychotherapy. I'm not a therapist. So there are things that you bring to me as a business owner and as a leader that are beneficial and important. And in order for me to say, yes, I need Cheryl to be in my world, that also requires for me to say, oh yeah, here's an area where I'm not competent, and I have some weaknesses, or I have some blind spots. And that piece is internally, it can be difficult to deal with.
Well, I need you too, Donnie.
And one of the big things that I relate a lot of this to is just the amount of untapped potential within individuals, organizations, societies, and that this process of tapping, organizing, really maximizing the potential that's available. It's to me that this is part of where the reverence is so important, because yeah, there are a bunch of reasons that we could go off track and have a bunch of justifications and excuses for not doing our best at this one crack that each of us has at a lifetime here. And maybe we have multiple ones, but this is the only one that we're like fully aware of and that we're in control of right now. And having the crack at this one, and really the potential that lives within each of us individually and collectively, to me, that I'm interested in how do we help unleash more of that, instead of finding those places where there are either weaknesses or challenges, and overemphasizing those.
Kate, if there was a question to help us bring it all together and begin to close it out, what would that question be?
The word grace keeps coming into my head like through this. So so that's it. There's no question. That's my one word close.
Awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
So then let's do, hey, Jim, did you have something you wanted to share?
I was going to just like pose a question based on
Sure.
that to each of us to ponder on our own, and for anybody who's watching, is what grace are you willing to allow?
Oof.
There's a word in Arabic, it's Rahman, and it means graciousness. And it is the second of the 99 names of Allah, of God, in Islam. And when I was at my most ill and bedridden, one of the tools that I used to heal was to look for that grace. I had a daily practice of looking for grace and then showing gratitude for the grace. And I think for me, grace and gratitude are my fundamental foundational spiritual practices that anchor me into my life and into my life's work.
I had two initial responses when you first asked the question, Jim. The first response is I could feel myself relax into it, and then there was another part of me, that self-damnation piece of like, oh no, I can't take that on. I'm not worthy of that. And then when I got to listen to Wendy share a little bit, it helped me relax into it. But when I think about grace for me and moving with grace and in grace, there really is this almost like this this feeling that encapsulates me of you're taken care of, and you're also in partnership with me. You're not enslaved to me. And feeling like I'm a partner with source or God or divine, it feels pretty cool. It's like, oh, right. I got your back, you got my back. And that I've never had that experience before.
Yeah, this morning I was thinking a lot about ancestry and ancestors. And during the 9th month of the lunar calendar, I guess the Chinese put out bowls of rice and stuff, offerings to the hungry ghosts, but also your ancestors that might be a little hungry. And I keep thinking about, rice is like such a staple. And when I think about myself at my worst, it's always like, oh my God, I don't have enough rice. but grace is just the opposite. I'm willing to put that bowl of rice on the altar and offer that's sort of grace, allowing grace. And so that image came to mind. So, yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for a very beautiful conversation. And if people want to reach out to you, let's just go around so people know how to best connect with you.
Yeah, for
Kate?
me, just
Yep, go ahead.
on Facebook is good. Just, yeah, if you want to either send a message, friend request, whatever, that's probably easiest, and especially since that's where this is going to be.
Awesome. Wendy, how can people get in touch with you?
So since we're on Facebook, I would say my business page, The Third Space with Wendy Ibrahim, or my personal account is Wendy Manchester Ibrahim.
Ms. Pinter?
You can definitely message me if you're listening to this on Facebook. If you're listening someplace else, because Donnie has many places, katepintor.com.
And Cheryl?
Yep, definitely. You can message me on Facebook, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and my website is leadingwithconsciousness.com.
Awesome. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can connect with me here on Facebook or LinkedIn, or send an email to Donnie, DONNIE, @thelifemaximizer.com. Thank you all for another wonderful conversation. I love you all so much, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
So much.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you.